Mr. Lynn, thank you so much for joining for an interview me today. And I would really like to discuss three topics today. So the first one is going to be about the school in general.
Right.
And also would like to talk about some main trends in secondary education for the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Thank you so much.
So the first question is, who is the founder of the school?
It's a great question. So you might know that Lamont Manhattan, at least in terms of New York City schools, is relatively young. You know, I think it has only existed since 2000. I may get the exact date wrong. Thank you, 2005. And it was founded by a company called Meritas Education. And at the time, Meritas was building premium international boarding schools based on the International Baccalaureate program, actually all over the United States and overseas. And so Lamont Manhattan became, at the time, I believe, the 10th school in the portfolio of schools at that time.
And so when a business is founded, usually one is supposed to have some kind of comparative advantage in front of other competitors in order not just to be like another fish in the pond. And my question is, what was the comparative advantage of Lamont Manhattan School?
That's a really good question. I think there's probably two ways to think about that. So as I mentioned earlier, the school was founded by a group called Meritas, which was a network of schools. And so I think it's important to talk about the comparative advantage of that group and then the school's place within that group, if that makes sense. Okay. And then the comparative advantage of the school in its location. So in short, I would say that the comparative advantage of the Meritas group at the time was this network of schools. And so as part of that group, as a business, the school benefited from being part of a larger financial organization. And so that from a business standpoint, each standalone school would not necessarily be subject to the local economic highs and lows, right? It would sort of spread out some of that financial risk. So that's from a business perspective. I think from an education perspective, one of the things that you may not know about independent schools or schools like Lamont is they tend to be very competitive with one another in their local market. So it makes it really hard to collaborate and innovate with professionals in other schools because they're always viewed as competitors. Right? So we don't want to take our edge, or we don't want to take our educational innovation and share it with our neighboring school because we don't want them to beat us, right? We don't want them to beat our enrollment. But in the case of Meritas, you know, for Lamont Manhattan, there were partner schools in Florida, in Texas, in Chicago, et cetera, so that it put the professionals in a position to incubate and innovate new ideas in education together, which was really powerful. And then I think the last thing I would share, just in terms of competitive advantage, you know, or why this location was selected. You know, first of all, New York City is it's a leading world city, right? It's a really important location for a group to be in. But then if you think about where we're located in the financial district, at the very southern tip of the island of Manhattan, in a truly historic location for the United States of America, but also, interestingly, an incredibly international location in the United States of America, it makes it a truly unique place to deliver an international curriculum, you know, with the International Baccalaureate. And one of the things that I like to tell people when they're thinking about the school is, you know, in our school, the idea that we live in a global society, it's not a theory, it's a day-to-day reality, right? You have friends from China, you have friends from Russia, you have friends from Brazil, you have friends from Brooklyn, right? You have friends, and so this is the world that we all live in, and I think it provides a unique
So just to sum it up, the location being international and having a great network of schools that are partners, and
That's right.
from where you can get some innovations.
That's right.
Very cool. Yeah, another question about Le Mans. So does Le Mans Manhattan has sales and marketing department?
In independent schools, we actually don't call it sales and marketing. We call it admissions and marketing,
Admissions
right?
and marketing.
Right, which is which serves the same function. But yes, so we have a dedicated group of people that that their job is to make sure that the school is known in its community. They run the marketing campaigns, the social media strategies, the search engine optimization,
So
all of those.
all of this is done.
All of that's done within
Wow.
the admissions and marketing department.
So I thought that just like that the school doesn't really have any any marketing stuff.
Right.
Or it has actually.
It does, yeah.
How many
Actually, it's small. It's a small group. So I think there are in that department. There's well, if you include the international piece, I think there's 4 or 5.
Whoa, but that's still impressive. It's more than in some commercial companies.
4 or 5 people. So we have certain people that are dedicated just to the international market, and then we have certain people.
Good. Okay, let's now talk about some new trends for the next 10 years in secondary education. So one of the questions that I have is why there are still some subjects like chemistry, biology, physics that I absolutely like. I even take some of them.
Right.
But there are like the new jobs, let's say being digital marketer, doing social media marketing, data science, what else, coding. A lot of these jobs, they don't really require students to take the subject. So my question is why these subjects are still in place?
That's a really great question. And it's actually a question that in education circles we've been talking about actually for a long time. And I think that one of the problems that we have in schools is that schools are notoriously slow to change, okay? And it's because a lot of what we do in education is based on tradition, right? And a lot of what we do in school is based on what happened before that we felt worked, okay? And then I would add to that it's not just as simple as a school maybe making some innovations or changes to its curriculum, which does happen, by the way, but people are reluctant to take things away, right? So there's this certain amount of time that you have in the day. So you're taking a schedule right now that includes all of those subjects, and I think it becomes very difficult to say, well, you should be taking coding instead of your English class. Or you should be taking data science instead of your physical education class. What are these sorts of things? I think there are 2 ways to look at your education. So one is to prepare yourself to enter the world and the market, which is what you're really talking about, right? Which is to be prepared to do the new jobs, right? To do data science, to do coding, or all of these sorts of things. So that's sort of viewpoint 1. Viewpoint 2 is high school to prepare you for university, right? So is high school to prepare you for the market, or is it to prepare you for university? Because those are different things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think about that?
That's a really good question. And so basically based on these 2 perspectives, but my question is why students nowadays cannot really select what path they want to take. Do they want to take program that will prepare them for the future, for the job market, or the program that will prepare them for higher education, for the next step, for the university? So my question is why this option is not available, let's say, at grade 10?
Yeah.
Is it again because society is not ready to take on this?
I think that's fair. I mean, society is not ready because all of the organizations that control schools, whether it be government, right, or accrediting bodies, right, like every school has to go through a process, usually every 5 years, where you're approved to continue to operate. All of those processes are based on the old ways, right? And so innovation is really hard for people. And I think the other thing that I like to point out, and by the way, I want you to know that I'm actually very worried about this problem. Okay, so I'm not the type of school leader that wants to say, oh, it's okay and we shouldn't worry about these things. In fact, I'm really interested in trying to solve those problems, but it's very challenging because the teachers that are being prepared in universities aren't necessarily being prepared for those new things either, right? The demand that we have from families that want to pay tuition to our school, to have these new types of programs is not necessarily there, although I am seeing that beginning to change, right? I'm meeting more families and more parents who are asking the same question, that you're asking, and so people do want those options. But I think that the last point that I would make about this, or where it becomes difficult for schools and families, is everybody involved, whether it's parents or the school leaders, we have a responsibility for the growth and development of the young people that come to our school. It's something that we all take very seriously. Your parents more so than me, right?
True.
They take
they're
that
really
right.
nervous about it.
But I'm a partner to your parents, right? And so it's really important that I take that seriously. And I'm always struck by the notion that very few people want to feel like their child is an experiment, right? Or that they're doing something experimental because people want to know that what's happening for their children is going to lead to a good result. And so when we think about it that way, which makes sense emotionally, right? It makes sense from a relational standpoint. It makes it harder to feel like you want to take a risk on an unproven program,
Especially when it comes to your child.
Yeah.
And also one person told me that our parents want for us not the best option, but a good option.
Right.
Which is usually more safe.
Right.
And
a reliable
option. Yeah.
Yep.
Sort of that, a reliable option.
A reliable option. And I think, so what's been fascinating to me, and I've seen this more with international students than I've seen it with American students, but what I'm actually starting to see happen more often in recent years is families trying to put their high school students in a situation where they're doing both things, and it turns into too much, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, they're trying to take the safe way, and they'll put their son or their daughter into an IB program school, and they'll be preparing them for university, but then on the side, they'll be doing all of these market-ready activities, right? Which are coding boot camps and any of things that would help students maybe go directly into a business, or families that are able to arrange internships for their children at what would typically be a younger age, right? A lot of those things happen in university, and so what happens is those students end up working 17, 18 hours a day, right?
That's true.
And then they don't get enough sleep, and then they burn out, and then maybe they fall behind in their academic courses. And so I think this is a problem that's worth solving, because in some ways it's not fair to this, it's not fair to the students, but the students get, and maybe you've known some people like this.
I've known. In fact, I can brag a bit about myself. I can say that I was one. I'm one, but I don't know. I don't think that this happens, that each student is willing to take on this path. But yeah, indeed, it's really hard. I mean, I didn't believe in burnout before I actually experienced one, and it is horrible. But after three, four of them, you just learn how you can, you learn some strategies how you can recover quickly. And you also learn how not to get to this point where you're overwhelmed, and just when you need to have some little of rest.
Right.
And but basically the second path, which is both safe option and market ready option, it really requires a lot of sacrifices, which is a lot of sacrifices.
Yeah.
And it's either sleep, either it's socialization.
Yeah.
But for me, I don't know why I just liked it to be this way. So I'm a crazy person.
Well, I don't know if you're crazy, but maybe ambitious. But
maybe ambitious.
But I think when I meet a student like you, Arseny, I think what I think about is, and I've actually said this in a meeting that I was in with some other educational leaders just yesterday, and what I said was, I think that what I worry about is I see students like you who you're coming to school every single day and you're sort of plugging through and doing everything that you need to do, but the whole time you're thinking about whatever your real thing is after.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's not your passion, right? It's not your school is not your passion. It's the other thing you're doing that where your mental energy needs to go or where you want it to go. And so what I really about a lot is how could we, and I don't have a great answer for Lamont today, just to be clear, but how could we take someone like you and instead of making you do all the things you don't want to do so that you can do what you do want to do and bringing those things together, right?
Whoa.
So that we can
That'd be
meet
cool.
meet your academic needs and also your desire to be and I'm making some assumptions here, right? Your desire to be an entrepreneur, your desire to be a successful business person, and I think realizing that if you work hard enough now, if you do some of the right things now, you could achieve some things faster than you could just played the game and went to university and then got a master's degree and then in 6 years' time from now, you still haven't gone forward because you've been waiting.
Yeah.
Is that? Please disagree.
I absolutely
with what I have to say, right?
Like, all I want to say is that I would be incredibly happy if school would be able to provide these options. But I understand that really there are not so many people that actually are like ambitious, have some goals, and therefore it might be quite expensive for the school to provide these kind of subjects because not all of the parents, most of the parents are not entrepreneurs, so they probably wouldn't understand this path and they wouldn't want to pay the money for these subjects.
Right.
But my question is, will there be any new subjects appearing in the student schedule, let's say like in the next 5 years, like for example, not coding, but for example, let's say financial education.
Right.
So, or entrepreneurship. Like, do you think that some of the subjects will appear in the schedule and actually become mandatory?
And you mean like broadly speaking? You mean like across schools everywhere?
Yes, across schools everywhere. Or maybe there are some particular that will happen for Le Mans in the nearest future.
That's a really good question. I think I'm actually at a point where, and some have called me maybe too bold, in this area, or too open-minded perhaps. But, one of the questions that I like to ask other leaders in the project that I'm working on is, what do you wish we could provide for high school students that feels impossible today, right? And what people often say is something like, I wish that we could have 100% choice for the students. And what that means is that the students are engaged in the courses that they select. They have some say or some influence on how they prove that they've learned what they've learned, right? Like maybe it's not that you're going to sit down and take a test. Maybe it's that you're going to build a website around a project that you're doing that demonstrates skills from multiple areas, right? That we're not going to learn each subject separately, right? That things are going to come together, right? So I'll give you an example. There's a school model out there called 3DE, which is a relatively new model, and they build high school curriculum around what they call a case methodology, okay? And so in case methodology, what happens is the students come into the school and they're formed into teams. And these teams might be 6 or 8 students, and you're on the same team for the entire semester, okay? And every 6 weeks, you go through a cycle with a case, okay? And at the beginning of the week, or the beginning of the 6-week cycle, right, you meet with business leaders from in the community, okay? And the business leader presents you, your team, with their biggest business problem, okay?
Oh my gosh.
And then for 6 weeks, your team's responsibility is to prepare a presentation to give back to that business leader at the end proving what you learned about their problem, and then with a recommendation for how they should improve or what they should do next as a business.
Wow.
Okay?
This is mind-blowing.
So we're doing this with 9th, 10th, and 11th grade students. Every 6 weeks it happens, right? Now you can imagine, in the beginning the students probably aren't very good at it.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah, it's real
But
stressful.
they fail, and they fail, and they fail, and they get feedback from the business leaders and feedback and support and feedback. And over time, they begin to learn. And what they're doing with curriculum is the teachers then, instead of teaching you a biology curriculum that has nothing to do with anything else, the teams begin to learn how to access the teachers for the knowledge they need to solve the problem they're working on.
And I think that the best thing is that they get knowledge, not not knowledge just in case, but just in time.
That's exactly right. So that is a very ambitious vision for what the future should be or could be for high school students. And there's actually lots of people working on different versions of this. So I just gave you one example. I'm aware of 2 or 3 other similar examples that are actually coming to fruition now. And I could see programs like this happening across the United States in 5 years' time, certainly. I don't know how widespread, but there are pilot programs like this happening now. And it's a really exciting new way to think about high school education. So my answer to your original question was, what new subjects might happen? And I think what I'm really telling you is, I don't think the future is about new subjects. It's about new ways, right? And I think the other thing that I would tell you about that is, so I'll talk about other things that I'm worried about for high school students. Well-being, you talked about burnout, okay? Well-being and how people are feeling mentally about things is worrisome. And I feel like a lot of times we have students who maybe they're unclear about what they want to do next or where they want to go with their lives. This is not uncommon for a 15, 16-year-old. It's very common, okay? I would argue with you as an adult, I'm still trying to figure out, right, where it is that I'm going to go next. But so that's not uncommon, but there's all this pressure, right? You have to get into the right school. You have to get the right grades. And I think so much of what happens in that way is not actually related to what a real-life adult experience is like. So when I talk about this case approach, right, or this other way of learning, that's more organic, right? That's more like what your life will be like as an adult, right? Or when you're in a business setting or a market setting, right? So when I say market ready, because I talked earlier about there's sort of two avenues that we're thinking about. You can market ready education or university ready education, right? Market ready doesn't necessarily mean to me being trained or to have skills in a specific job. What it actually means to me is to have so much self-awareness and enough agency and initiative that you can learn what you need to learn when you need to learn it, and you can take advantage of the market to live the life that you want to live. That's what I mean by market ready. So go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say that basically what you mean is that market ready does not imply having the right hard skills like coding, designing, I don't know, understanding how Google Ads work, for example, but instead having the right soft skills, like communication, an ability to work in teams, an ability to actually find the right information, an ability to learn. I think it is really important nowadays to learn how to learn. And unfortunately, I'm really looking forward that we will have this subject in school. Because I took one class from Jim Quick. He's like a really famous expert on learning how to learn, and this class helped me a lot. Yeah, and so I think soft skills is a really big thing, and I hope that there will be classes that teach them in the near future.
Think about this, and here I would just say this on that point, right, which is the world is changing so fast now, right? You've heard of Moore's Law?
Yeah, doubles every year.
Yeah, the processing power doubles every year, right? And so it's crazy. So, I mean, we're actually at a point where whatever you learn in your high school computer science class about coding this week will likely be irrelevant in 2 years.
Don't listen to Mr. Tennell.
Okay, I won't tell Mr. Tennell, right? But and I would say, by the way, it doesn't mean it's not worth learning,
Yeah, of course.
right? But I think this is why, this perspective that you're offering, right? It's really more important. How do I learn how to learn? How do I have agency and self-belief, and how do I have a really good handle on what I want and how I want to move through the world going forward? Is more important than who's the best coder.
Yeah.
Because you can be a great coder, but if you have no idea about what your purpose is, or what type of life you want to live, that's not going to, at a certain point, that skill will no longer serve you.
Yeah, absolutely agree. The other thing I would like to mention, and I would like to bring up, is COVID. So
Yeah.
how did it impact? Because you're one of the persons that actually experienced it, this big thing in education firsthand. And so could you please name 3 ways that COVID changed the educational process that we have right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the most important thing that I think happened is, I talked earlier about schools being notorious for being slow to change, right? Well, this need to change was thrust upon schools across the world, and they had no choice, right? And so schools had to pivot to online learning, or they had to pivot to hybrid learning, right? Some students coming in, some students coming out. And every school experienced some version of that for some period of time. I would argue that most of us did it poorly, okay? However, that's that whole thing, keep learning to fail or keep failing forward, right? You start to learn things. I would say that because of that, families and students have figured out that schools can actually do something different, right? So when we say, well, we just can't do that because we've never done that before, people are a little less willing to accept that at face value, right? Because they're saying, well, you can do something. So just a really important example, right? The whole concept of what it means to remote learn or be a remote learner has actually gotten more complicated, not less complicated. And so what I mean by that is, first of all, I would say, just having a teacher open up a Zoom link into their classroom, I do not consider that to be high quality remote learning, right? However, I would say there are very effective methods of remote teaching, right? What's unfair is to ask the teachers to do both at the same time, right? So you can have a very good virtual class, or you can have a very good in-person class. It's very difficult to do them both together. Because the teaching methods are different, right? And so I would say that. However, lots of folks have gotten accustomed to the flexibility, right? Of I don't necessarily need to be there every day, right? And so I was telling a friend of mine the other day that right here at Le Mans, one of the biggest problems I feel that we've had so far this year is student attendance, because students feel that they don't necessarily need to be here on an everyday basis. And in some respects, and I know you're recording this, but I'll deny that I said this potentially, right? But in some respects, and sometimes I think they're right, I understand. A colleague of mine said in an interview that I was doing with him the other day, which is, students don't want their time to be wasted. And so if you feel that what's happening in your class on a day-to-day basis doesn't have high value, and now you know that you can catch up because your lessons are posted online, because the teacher's posting videos, or you might be able to zoom in or get a recording of the class, and then you can do that learning at a time that maybe works better for you for some reason, why wouldn't you do that? Why shouldn't that be allowed? I see you smiling, right? So does this make sense to you?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense for me. And the biggest actual discovery for me today is that I didn't think that school administration and you really think about these issues as whether subjects are actually interesting for students. And I got so surprised when you said that you can see why some students do not really enjoy visiting some classes, and I also have really like that you mentioned that some students actually recognize the value of their time, and they want like to get the highest, let's say, like return on their time invested.
Right.
I really appreciate that you have this kind of approach. I would say that you have a temptation, for example, like if your parents go on a big trip, on a big vacation, but you have school,
Right.
and if this happens during holidays, and like the vacation, for example, if you go quite far away, let's say somewhere like to Bali, and there's a big time difference, there is no really point to go just for 1 week.
Right.
Holidays in school are 1 week, so probably you can like do 2 weeks, and you're really tempted now to do
Right.
that because you can basically study virtually.
Right.
And so I think, like, from my point of view, it is really cool. I really like it, but I understand that some teachers don't really like it.
Right.
And I would like for you just to tell why the school doesn't really like that.
Well, I think that it comes down to there's always a lag and I think this is true in any organization. There's always a lag between where the policy is and where things are going next. Right? There's like a gap, right? So I think that, you know, like most organizations, the school goes through an annual policy development process, right? So we don't change very fast, right? So I recognize all of these issues, and then as we get into our policy development, then we begin to change. But I think teachers in particular are put in a very difficult position because very few of them have actually been trained. You think most of the teachers in our school have not actually been trained to lead virtual learning. They all came up to lead in-person learning.
Yeah.
And as I pointed out, you know, earlier, the skills and the approaches are actually very different, right?
Yeah, hybrid learning.
Hybrid learning, yeah, it takes more effort, it takes more pre-planning, it certainly takes more tech skills, right? And of course, like every other workforce, you know, the teachers are all in different places with that. And so the school did not build itself or organize itself to deliver that type of learning, right?
Do you think then there won't be necessarily a lot of hybrid schools in the future, but there will be, let's say, like only in-person school and only online school?
Oh, that's actually a really great question. I think the concept that I see is that schools will become, I call it school as a service center. Okay. And so what I mean by that is in schools, when we recognize these issues at a higher level, we can organize around them to solve some of these problems. I think what you're going to see is schools offering both modes, but different groups of teachers working in those segments. So for example, we might have a department, we have a two-tier math department, okay? We have one math department that's teaching all the in-person classes, and then we have another math department that's teaching, you know, the online classes. But then when we get to this choice model, students will be able to select which modes or which combinations of modes work well for them, right? And then the other thing that I see is that the school, if we organize in that case methodology that I was talking about before, where the teachers are available as resources and guides for students, but classes are only organizing when they're needed, right? And there's actually there's a school in Los Angeles called the USC, it's with the University of Southern California. It's the USC Hybrid High School that works in a way like this, and the school is open, I think, for 65 or 70 hours a week. It's staffed, but the students are only required to be physically in person for 20 or 30 hours a week. They can decide when they come in, right? So if Saturday morning works for you, there's a Saturday morning option, right? But because we're not tying the school, we're not tying the delivery of education into a very specific schedule, right? It becomes flexible. So then the technology is required, right? And that's when we get into something that we call asynchronous, right? Which is if you and I are in the same class, we may go to the same, it's a little more like a university model, I suppose, but we may go to the same mathematics seminar on a Thursday afternoon, and we may actually be enrolled in the same class, but we're not necessarily sitting next to each other at the same desk like every day, right?
Yeah.
But we may interact online. There's some of both sorts of things happening. And there's some very good ways to do this. Universities are doing a pretty good job with this now. I think there's more university experiences that are like that. My own graduate school experience had some of that in it years ago. It was very innovative at that time, but it's becoming more and more common. So if it can happen at that level, why not at high school?
Yeah. So 2 last questions that I wanted to talk about. The first one is about IB. So what I see is that now IB program is becoming more and more popular. For example, in Ukraine, there is only one school that is doing IB. It is international, and also there is another school which is currently which is in construction, and it will be built in a few years, and it is full IB. Which is going to be the first full IB school in Kiev. And I'm just interested, like, how would you explain to a person that is not really familiar with different kinds of like IB, AP programs, how IB is different? Is different?
How is IB different? Well, I would say IB is different because of a couple of things. One, it mimics the university program in grade 11 and 12, okay, or US 11 and 12, right? So each course is 2 years. So the learning is more in-depth, right? It's not just a survey. You go deep into a topic. I think the other thing that makes IB different is that it is intended to develop and foster critical thinking, right? Which is you don't take, it trains you or it teaches you that you're not going to just take information at face value, right? That you will analyze that information and you will try to understand why scientists think what scientists think. Why does a mathematician think what a mathematician thinks? This is what the TOK course is supposed to be about. And that course is actually vital because it also is intended to bring all of the courses, together. So, but it is a very academic curriculum. I've been IB educator for 17 years. So I actually am very familiar with this program, and I value it highly. But it is university preparation. So going to our two-path,
yes, it
right,
is really
our two-path conversation, right? And so, but it's very good university preparation. And so the other thing that's really valuable about it, this is something that I say to parents a lot, is it's an externally moderated curriculum. And what that means is the big grades or the big assessments that are given in the program are actually graded by teachers from other schools, not from our school. And that happens in every school across the world. And so that does a couple of really cool things. One, it calibrates what we're doing, right? So we're not just giving grades based on a collection of our own opinions, right? We don't say that, we don't say Arseny has an A because we think he's a nice kid, right? Yeah, sure. We say that you have an A because we know, based on our experience with all of these other moderations, right? So that's an actual credential. And this is one of the reasons why it's so attractive to universities, is because when they see an IB transcript, it means, they know that the bias it's been controlled for. So,
got it. And then, so soft skills. Just any other trends in education aside from soft skills, as we mentioned before, being free in terms of attending school, doing online, offline, maybe any other ones?
I think, that's a good question. I think those are the big ones. I think that for high school in particular, I think what I'm about to say is mostly a United States, an American perspective, but in American schools, American high schools, in public schools, they tend to be very large, comprehensive public high schools. They have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 students in them, right? Very different than Lamont, Manhattan. I think the trend is going to be towards smaller groups, more personal, right? And by the way, that doesn't have to be in the same zip code. We have the technology, right? I was meeting with somebody from a school the other day that is 100% online, and they actually purposely make sure that they don't have too many students from the same zip code, because they want to create a network, right? They don't want to be stuck with, here's how all of the people in the financial district think about something, right? They want to have people from all over coming into their classrooms. And so those folks talked a lot about developing a small community, but not having to be physically together in one zip code, right? which is really important. And I think that one of the realizations that I have started to have, and some of the folks that I'm associating with, which is, look, I'm an old person now, okay? I'm Generation X, okay? The way that I think about community and the way that I think about having relationships with people is very different than I think the younger generations are. Your life experience, or the life experience of people your age is totally different than what mine is growing up, right? I did not have a cell phone. There was no internet. There was none of these things, right? And so I think sometimes people in my generation are too judgmental. They look at young people and they say, right? And they say, well, you're always on your phone, or you do this or you do that. But, I think what I'm starting to realize is young people are finding community in those spaces, and it's okay. It can be okay. Sometimes people just want to go to the negative things like gaming addiction or, these kind. And I know that those are real problems, but that's not most people. I think it is incumbent upon educators to realize that we call Gen Z, right, or the students that are coming like your age, and then all the next students, right? They're growing up in a world that's completely different. We really need to think about how to meet you where you are and help you actualize your life in a way that's powerful for you, that's based on you. It's not based on me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, it absolutely does. And I also would like to really emphasize on the point that what you have said about internet. So from one point of view, like it might be a poison and everything might be a drug. That it really depends on the amount that you take in. And also there is a very cool picture that I've seen one day. Like older generations, they really like. Basically to show pictures of, let's say, of a bus. A lot of kids are there and everyone is on their phones. Yeah. But there is a picture which was taken like 100 years ago. It is also a bus, and like a bunch of adults are basically all sitting down reading the newspaper.
The newspaper, yeah.
Yeah. This one, I've seen it. Yeah. It was really cool. So this is something I would say like in production for my generation.
Yeah. It's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same.
And the last question that I basically ask every single person that I interview, and this question is incredibly silly in the context of today me interviewing you, but do you need a higher education? Do you need not high school, but usually?
That's a good question, right?
And a university education.
That's a really good question. It's a hard question for me to answer, right? And because
university education, not school education.
You know what? I'm gonna answer your question very politically, right? Which is to say, we've talked throughout this interview, right, about being market ready. And when I talk about education, I'm mostly talking about high school, right? Yeah. Is your high school education preparing you to be market ready, or is it preparing you to go to university? I would argue this, which is that if your high school education does a really good job of helping you understand who you are, right, and what you're about, what you're passionate about, where you can have impact in the world, what problems you think you can solve or want to solve, right? If you have great awareness of those things, then that puts you in a position to use the university system to achieve your goals.
Got it.
Okay? So I don't think, and I understand maybe where this question is coming from, right? Because I've seen a lot of it, I've read a lot about it, I've heard people talk about it, which is university is very expensive, right? And lots of people are beginning to question, is it still valuable, right? So my answer to that question really is, I believe it's still valuable if you do it, right? Or if you are intentional about what you're doing. I think the mistake that people make is when they blindly just try to mold themselves to fit into some brand, right? Or to associate with, well, I want to go to University X because I think it's cool, or because I think it's prestigious, or because of these sorts of things, without thinking about all of those other things. I have always said, and by the way, I haven't been very successful at this, okay? But I have always said that it's really my dream that students that are graduating from any high school that I'm associated with are really picking schools that meet their needs, picking universities that meet their needs, rather than trying to shape themselves or remake themselves into something that they're not, so that they can go to the cool university.
That's been the most, I've interviewed now quite a lot of people, and that's been the most, I would say, meticulous answer for the question.
But I've thought about this a lot. Obviously, I've thought about this a lot. So
thanks so much. Yeah. It's been really a very good discussion. I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah.
Mr. Lynn, thank you so much.
yeah, it's been fun. Good luck with your project.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And everyone, please follow it. Follow YouTube channel.
That's right.
And thumbs up.
Yep.
And write down in the comments what do you think about the last question.
Yeah.
What's your answer?
All
Thanks
right.
so much for watching. Thanks so much, Mr. Lynn.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much.
You got it. That was fun.